So something historic happened last video. Carthage actually won a war. I know, shocking, right? but I'm actually really interested. So far, it's 1-on-1. I'm keeping tally, guys. The Greeks won the first one. Syracuse won the first one. Carthage won the second one. Let's see who can break the tiebreaker. There are 7 wars in total, so I'm really looking forward to see who won the majority. Yeah, I don't really have much else to say other than we ought to get to it, huh? So without any further ado, let's watch the third war of, the Sicilian Wars by the YouTuber known as Invicta.
In the year 405 BC, the island of Sicily was a smoking ruin. The recent offensive by Carthage had created a situation in which the Punic power was now poised to take control of all of Sicily. Only one thing stood in their way: Syracuse. The mighty Greek city-state, which had long resisted their influence, now seemed ready to fall as well. But in this hour of need would rise the hero and tyrant Dionysius, whose bold new leadership would change the course of the war.
Oh.
In Syracuse's darkest hour, it would be saved by an unlikely hero. The man's name was Dionysius. He was a lowly public official who had spent the last few years as a clerk lost in the bureaucracy of his home city. And yet, the fates decreed a very different thread for his life. When the Second Punic Sicilian War broke out in 410 BC, Dionysius was among those to answer the call to arms. With great ambition and a knack for organization, he quickly worked his way through the ranks. Details are sparse, but it seems that around 409 BC, he had attained significant stature within the army with a string of achievements to his name. This is evidenced by the fact that when Carthage had launched its assault upon Acragas in 406 BC, Dionysius was tapped to join the army command staff. Though Carthage was ultimately victorious, the Syracusans continued to fight a dogged defense of their eroding territory. Eventually, the plague-stricken invaders decided that they had made enough gains and settled a new peace before withdrawing their main force from the island. This was a very delicate time on Sicily, as all knew that Carthage would eventually return to finish the job if given the opportunity. In Syracuse, some considered reconciliation, while others argued for resistance. It was precisely these cracks in the political scene which created an opportunity for Dionysius. The plot he concocted was bold and nefarious. It began by seemingly faking an assassination attempt on his own life. Here, the perpetrator was caught just in time, allowing Dionysius to draw public sympathy and attention.
Oh.
With this supposed threat as an excuse, he was given permission to hire 600 mercenaries for personal protection within the city limits. Shortly thereafter, though, he expanded the armed group to 1,000, staffing it with many loyal followers.
Oh wow, talk about cunning. The Greeks, man. The thing is, when they play politics, they're not afraid to be a little more underhanded or cunning with some of their, maneuvers. And this, Dionysius, we haven't heard of someone faking an assassination attempt yet. This is a first on the channel's history, but that's genius. And then, under the pretext of protection, he basically brings an army with him into the city walls, which I'm assuming he's going to use to just straight up take power. Kind of like strong arm, kind of like what Napoleon did, when he became the first consul, just essentially brought his army with him. Kind of like that. Like, I don't know. I think he's gonna strong arm it.
At this point, Dionysius now made his moves openly. Cutting through the democratic red tape which had shackled his ambitions, he now deployed his mercenary forces across Syracuse to act as a police force and to seize control. Democratic opposition was silenced and all rebellion was crushed. By 405 BC, Dionysius was now the tyrant of Syracuse.
My work is easy because
In theory, his
Wow, holy crap. Okay, that was kind of cool. I guess that's what happens when you just give people an army, or the allowance of an army. But man, he's making some big brain moves.
largest threat would have been the other Greek communities which might seek to depose him. For instance, Sparta had a history of intervening abroad to topple tyrannical regimes. However, in this case, they actually sent an emissary to strike a deal of mutual support. Sparta, which had previously sided with Syracuse against the Athenians, hoped that the favor might be returned. In exchange, they seem to have given Dionysius the privilege of conscripting mercenaries from the lands under Spartan authority. Thus, with his reign protected at home and on the eastern flank, the tyrant now prepared to turn west against Carthage.
Alright, wow, even frickin' Sparta's on his side. Talk about luck. I wonder how he's gonna do against the Carthaginians, though. Assuming Hamilcar, you know, the guy who took over for Hannibal last video, is still leading, then that would seem like... that would be an interesting pair and matchup.
But this would be no easy task. In the years that followed, he would further consolidate power and begin an intense period of militarization, which would turn Syracuse into an impregnable fortress. The tyrant now made ready for war. Dionysius would eventually field an army of 80,000 soldiers and a fleet of 200 warships. This enormous force would require mountains of supplies to equip and maintain. Thus it was that one of his most important reforms was the introduction of standardized gear. Whereas mercenaries and citizen soldiers had previously been responsible for this kit, Syracuse now sought to create one of the greatest state armories of its era. To this end, we are told that smiths from across Sicily, Italy, Greece, and beyond were commissioned to produce at least 140,000 sets of weapons and armor. In addition, the engineers...
You know, I had heard that, like, the Greeks, especially before, like, Alexander and Philip the Great's, like, standing professional army, some of Greek history is that they were just, like, they didn't have, like, a standing professional army, more like citizens who, you know, when called to war, you know, I think were even supposed to bring their own equipment, and then they go and fight, and then when the war's over, they just leave to go back to their mundane lives. So that would make sense in the way that the Greeks fought, if that knowledge I learned was correct. And so this is almost seems like he's having like almost starting to maybe form a standing force, at least with the equipment, right? Like I obviously just said, sometimes they were expected to just bring their own equipment. Here he has equipment ready. So that's interesting. And again, militarization, he seems like quite the reformer, and he's gonna have to in order to, you know, be in a military league to challenge Carthage. Wow. I'm impressed.
And carpenters of Syracuse were busy retrofitting the fleet and constructing the new hulking class of quinquereme warships, which were about 20% longer than the standard trireme and carried almost double the number of rowers and marines. In addition, all manner of artillery pieces and siege equipment were assembled. Yet even during this period of preparation, Dionysius did not sit idle within the walls of his city. Syracusan forces mounted escalating raids against the villages and cities of Sicily to probe Carthage's hold on this territory and to begin exerting pressure on the various communities to reconsider their allegiance. By 398 BC, 7 years after taking power, Dionysius was finally ready to make his move. The armies of Syracuse were marshaled and an ultimatum was thrown down. Carthage must abandon its hegemony or prepare for war. Hardly waiting for the inevitable response, the tyrant now launched his invasion. The objective appears to have been to take the Punic stronghold of Mattia on the far side of the island before a proper defense could be mounted. Therefore, the Syracusan forces made a rapid advance along the southern coast, leaving a trail of destruction in their path. Carthaginians and collaborators were murdered out of hand, with their property being looted to fill the coffers of the army. Sensing that the winds of change...
Okay, I have to say peace was never an option. That's what Dionysius is operating by. And again, look at how the roles have reversed. Carthage was the aggressor last time. They were the ones jumping and looting and taking on everyone. But now they're lagging as Dionysius and Syracuse have now taken the initiative this time as the aggressor, while Carthage is fumbling, you know, has to fumble to get a response right away. Alright, usually it works out for people who take initiative, so we will see just how effective these militaristic reforms from Syracuse is doing, but Dionysius seems to know what he's doing. He seems competent so far, but we'll see when pitched battles start happening.
Were blowing, opportunistic Sicilians joined the army as it marched. By the time Dionysius reached the gates of Mattia in the summer of 398 BC, his army numbered at least 80,000 infantry. The city of Mattia was one of the greatest Carthaginian strongholds in Sicily. Founded shortly after the city of Carthage around 800 BC, it was located atop an island inside a natural harbor. As such, it proved a highly defensible and well-connected site, which quickly led to Mattia's rise as a great commercial and military center. By the time the Syracusans arrived, it was a formidable city with a full wall, over 20 towers, and several fortified gatehouses. Adding to its protection, the mole, the only way to access the city on foot, had been destroyed by the citizens. Yet this would not deter Dionysius. He now anchored his entire fleet in the bay to cut off the city by sea, whilst tasking his army with the job of rebuilding the mole to prepare for a direct assault if Mattia refused to surrender. Some inside may have considered this option. Yet the bloody advance waged by the Syracusans thus far led many to believe that this path would lead to either death or enslavement. Thus, as the noose tightened around Mattia, they sent envoys to Carthage, seeking desperate aid. The Phoenicians, meanwhile, were unprepared for the lightning speed with which Dionysius had launched his campaign.
Like I said, man, he took the initiative, he basically took the aggression, he didn't wait for his enemies to have time to respond. He's completely taken the initiative. Carthage is fumbling now to be like, wait, what's going on? We gotta move, like, you know? And mobilization takes a bit, you know? It's not like instantly, okay, we're ready, like, you know? So at least you're gonna mobilize your full power, so... Again, like, depending on how fast Dionysius... I mean, he's kind of blitzing, he's kind of like... using some lightning warfare, he's blitzing the Carthaginians right now. So, yeah, we're gonna have to see just how things are gonna go. But so far, Carthage seems like it's gonna be on the back foot, but we're gonna see if they can muster up their strength and, you know, prepare better.
The last Carthaginian offensive had taken years of preparation. And yet, realizing that the fall of Mattia and in turn Punic Sicily could undo centuries of progress, they now scrambled to summon a response. Himilco, brother of the Hannibal who had led the Second Punic Sicilian War, was appointed command, while a fleet of 100 triremes and tens of thousands of troops were marshaled. These now set off immediately for Mattia. Himilco's timing was fortuitous. The Carthaginians managed to catch the forces of Dionysius in the bay, trapping his larger navy in its narrow confines. To make matters worse, the huge transport fleet to the south lay dangerously exposed. Its defenders were overwhelmed, and the nearly 500 ships were either captured or set afire.
Oh, wow.
In theory, the remaining Syracusan ships still outnumbered those of Himilco, and featured many of the new, powerful conquirums. However, the geography of the bay meant that these could not bring their numbers to bear against the Carthaginians for...
Okay, I have to say, pretty good start. I mean, so far they were caught off guard, but they've managed to at least catch the Syracusan fleet, at least this portion right here, off guard and basically take them out. Meanwhile, even though the Syracusans, I don't know, the new ships of Syracuse can't fully utilize their strength due to the geography, so, I'm wondering, at least in the naval aspect, if Carthage has pulled off the W just by being quicker.
Breakout. Himilco was thus assured that by holding the mouth of the harbor, he could either win in battle or starve them out.
Closest to the pin.
And yet Dionysius was not so easily bested. Using slingers, archers, and his new war machine, the catapult, the Carthaginians were kept at arm's length from his fleet. This allowed him to now begin hauling his ships over the low, flat spit of land to his north.
Oh, wow.
Soon, many Greek warships had been portaged across the strait and could circle around the rear of the Carthaginians. In this way, would their roles be reversed?
Holy crap. That kind of reminds me of what the Ottomans did during the siege of Constantinople, where they managed to maneuver their ships through land and then to quickly catch the Romans off guard. Kind of like that, like similar, I guess. But he literally Uno reverse card that plan. Wow.
With the risk of encirclement and annihilation, Himilco was thus forced to retreat back to Carthage. As they sailed off, the citizens of Mattia knew that their last hope of rescue had vanished. But this realization also brought
just through maneuvering. Sure, he lost ships, but Dionysius completely still managed to rebound perfectly. And, like, Again, he essentially Uno reverse card them right now. Wow. Genius.
A great fighting zeal. Though alone, they now prepared for a final stand. Dionysius rose to the challenge by redoubling his efforts to construct the land bridge to the city while covering his operations with the fleet, siege engines, and towers. Finally, these reached the wall and broke through a section. What followed was bloody urban warfare. Here is how Diodorus Siculus describes the scene. Quote, "The Mautians, as they took account of the magnitude of the peril, and with their wives and children before their eyes, fought the more fiercely out of fear for their fate. There were some whose parents stood by, entreating them not to let them be surrendered to the lawless will of victors, who were thus wrought to a pitch where they set no value on life. Others, as they heard the laments of their wives and helpless children, sought to die like men, rather than to see their children led to captivity. Flight, of course, from the city was impossible, since it was entirely surrounded by the sea, which was controlled by the enemy. The battle grew fierce, and abundant reinforcements climbed the ladders, until at last the Sicilian Greeks wore down their opponents by weight of numbers. Straight away, Dionysius' entire army burst into the city, coming also by the mole, and now every spot was a scene of mass slaughter. For the Sicilian Greeks, eager to return cruelty for cruelty, slew everyone they encountered, sparing without distinction not a child, not a woman, not an elder.
You know, I have to say, with all these sieges and, like, sackings, in these wars, like, everyone always attacks villages and nearby settlements, and then in sieges, when they take cities or towns, they kill, like, all the people or enslave them. Dude, it sucks to just be a normal person. Imagine you're just working on your farm, your little settlement, and then just an army shows up and kills you and burns everything. Or you're in a city just chilling one day, and then you're suddenly besieged, and once they get in, they just kill everyone or enslave everyone. That's what I've been saying. I'm like, it sucks to just be a normal person. You know? You can't, like, it just sucks. Like, man, just all the average, like, normal people who have to suffer through all this. That's why it's kind of tragic, you know? But that's war, I guess.
Dionysius, wishing to sell the inhabitants into slavery for the money he could gather, at first attempted to restrain the soldiers from murdering the captives. But when no one paid any attention to him, and he saw the fury of the Sicilian Greeks was not to be controlled, he stationed heralds to cry aloud and tell the Mautians to take refuge in the temples which were revered by the Greeks. The massacre which unfolded was absolute. In the aftermath, as the campaign season drew to a close, the Syracusan army finished picking the bones of Mautia clean before returning home to Syracuse. A small garrison force remained to lay claim to the ashes, while Dionysius drew plans for the next year's ambitious campaigning. But he was not the only one with a taste for blood. The Carthaginians now fully understood the magnitude of the threat at hand and also spent the winter months mustering a massive force. When Dionysius emerged from Syracuse in 390.
Okay, alright. So Dionysius had the advantage of basically catching the Carthaginians fully unaware, being quick with his lightning speed, and managing to outdo their quick scrambled force. Still beyond impressive, but now we'll see what a more prepared and on guard Carthage can do, because I feel like this is the real test now. Like, how will he do against, like, a Carthage that is more mobilized and more aware of his threat and presence? You know, more on an equal footing, you know what I mean?
97 BC, he was countered by Himilco, who deployed 400 triremes and 50,000 soldiers on the western end of the island. Neither side was immediately prepared for a pitched fight, and instead sought to better position themselves. For Himilco, this meant re-establishing Carthage's authority. Next, he set about lifting the siege of Segesta and establishing Punic garrisons to re-secure western Sicily. To press matters further, Himilco now made an assault on the eastern side of the island. Sweeping around the northern coast, he collected tribute from Lipara and eventually made a landing at Cape Palorum. This feint drew out the Greek army from Messene, at which point a detachment of the Carthaginian fleet filled with pick rowers and marines quickly sailed around their rear to seize and sack the city.
Okay, so Himilco is not a chump either. Like, he was caught off guard. You know, Dionysius definitely outbested him in the previous siege, but, you know, the thing is, these guys seem both really competent. You know, Dionysius and Himiko so far in their operations, now that Himiko is much more ready. So now it seems like they seem more equals to my mind. And I like it when equals fight, like people more on even standing, because it just makes it more interesting. So, you know, it seems like we're about to get the ultimate, like battle. It's gonna have to be a pitched battle, and I'm wondering at that point who will be the better commander.
Soon after, the main two fleets would clash at sea in 397 BC at the Battle of Catana. Here, Himilco fielded some 200 triremes and 300 transports.
Alright, moment of truth, baby. Let's see. Let's see if, like, the militarization of Dionysius is enough to match Carthaginian, or even, not just match, maybe even best, the Carthaginians on sea.
Retrofitted with rams, while Dionysius deployed a mix of 180 triremes and the new quinqueremes. According to Diodorus Siculus, the naval battle began in the Greeks' favor when their admiral, Leptines, led a sudden sally of an elite force.
Okay, I need to look at something really quick. So, just looking at Google images of triremes and quinquere. I can't say it. I keep saying queer. But I was just looking at images to look at these ships. Sorry. Let's get back to it.
However, he was ultimately driven to flight, leaving the rest of his fleet leaderless and disorganized in the face of the ensuing Carthaginian counterattack.
Oh.
Though the Greek quinqueremes were larger and far better manned than the Punic triremes, the smaller ships were able to lock them down with grapples and shoot, swarm, or ram them into oblivion. When the battle was finished and the Syracusan fleet crushed, the Carthaginians showed no mercy.
Holy crap. Okay, so let me get that again. He like left the battle? Wait, I'm sorry. I need to catch that one more time.
And the new quinqueremes. According to Diodorus Siculus, the naval battle began in the Greeks' favor when their admiral, Leptines, led a sudden sally of an elite force. However, he was ultimately driven to flight, leaving the rest of his fleet leaderless and disorganized in the face of the ensuing Carthaginian counterattack.
Oh.
Though the Greek quinqueremes were
So yeah, and he also mentioned that the Carthaginians not only had grapples but rams on them, and since they were more numerical, and I assume their smaller ships could probably outmaneuver the giant quinqueremes, that probably helped too. Holy crap. The Carthaginians proved that their seafaring is better than the Syracusans.
larger and far better manned than the Punic triremes into oblivion. When the battle was finished and the Syracusan fleet crushed, the Carthaginians showed no mercy, sweeping along the coast to kill any Greeks attempting to swim back to shore. Accordingly, the coasts of Sicily became choked with the corpses and broken timbers of the defeated navy. This was a catastrophic defeat for Dionysius. Now on the back foot, he was forced to retreat back within the walls of Syracuse. This was a prudent move. After all, Syracuse was among the largest and most fortified cities in the Greek world.
Yeah, and he also has been fortifying it himself, as he mentioned during his militarization, so it's probably even more formidable than before. So definitely a good defensive point, but holy crap, like, man, the Carthaginians struck back hard. Like, it's like the Empire Strikes Back, you know? Wow. Alright, I am telling you guys, these guys are like kind of more equal, but it seems like, yeah. Holy crap. That was kind of cool.
It had withstood the might of the Athenian expedition, and since then had only further been fortified by the ambitious building programs of Dionysius. And yet Himilco was undaunted. He first conducted military and diplomatic operations around eastern Sicily to strip Syracuse of its supporters. Then, he set up his army to choke off its land approaches whilst deploying the fleet.
Wow, how is Dionysius even gonna get out of this? Himilco seems to have perfectly countered him. I don't know how he's gonna get out of this, guys.
To blockade the harbor. A camp was then established to the west of the city, and battle was offered. When the Syracusans refused to emerge, this greatly increased the morale of the attackers. For the next 30 days, they were left to ravage the countryside with impunity. Syracuse would have begun to starve out, were it not for their ability to maintain an intermittent supply line from their eastern docks. Thus, the winter months were spent in an uneasy stalemate. But with the arrival of spring came a thawing of this inactivity. Soon, the Carthaginians made probing attacks upon the city and are said to have even penetrated one of its outer districts. Yet Syracuse too was able to mount its own sallies, raids, and ambushes. The tide began to shift when the Greeks received crucial food and military convoys and were able to win a series of skirmishes at sea. But the true turning point came with the arrival of the plague. In a similar
Holy crap, this plague keeps coming back to bite the Carthaginians' butts. Like, what the? This plague keeps coming back randomly to kind of cripple the Carthaginians and their momentum. Dang.
manner to the Athenians before them, the Carthaginian forces were crippled by this calamity. Now, Dionysius was able to finally make his move. On a moonless night, forces were sent to circle out around the Punic camp and attack it from the rear at first light. At this precise moment, the Greek fleet would sail out en masse to assault the Carthaginian naval positions in the front. This coordinated attack caught Himilco's forces by surprise. Chaos reigned in the camp as units...
Dang, dude. Dionysius, man. The god... Wow, I thought that looked like almost unwinnable. Like, he was besieged, but thank goodness for the plague, I guess.
overwhelmed the Punic forts on the hills, while cavalry and triremes assailed the anchored fleet along the shore. Dionysius himself was said to have ridden into the fray and helped light the fires which began to spread to the embattled camp. And yet, Himilco's force stood resolute. They managed to recover from the initial shock, maintaining the line and surviving until nightfall. The army may have lived, but the siege of Syracuse was over. From this victory, Dionysius was in a position to destroy the Carthaginians outright. And yet, in the dead of night, he agreed to meet secretly with Himilco to discuss terms of peace. This perplexing move is a fascinating example of the Machiavellian mind of the Syracusan tyrant. It seems that he saw the Carthaginian threat as a useful tool in domestic politics. With the threat effectively neutralized, but not outright removed, Dionysius could continue to use it as leverage against his rivals.
Oh my goodness, this dude's still playing politics. He's like, that's even more embarrassing than just straight up destroying them. He's like, you know what, I can use you people to further my own goals, to destroy you even more later. Dang, the dude's like, he's playing politics mental chess right now with everyone. Wow, so this seems like a OW for Syracuse. Like, so far, because they... At least by the end, there was a lot of reversals in that war. Like, Dionysius had the upper hand, and then Hamilco, you know, had the upper hand. They kept going, but it seems like Dionysius came out on top because he had an opportunity to destroy them, but is graciously accepting peace talks. So it seems like in this war, this point goes to Syracuse. So let's say Syracuse wins the first one, Carthage wins the second one, and Syracuse wins the third one. Okay, I'm keeping tally. I want to see who wins the most. So far, 2-1.
Any who might challenge his rule. And so, with the addition of receiving a massive bribe of 300 silver talents, he agreed to allow Himilco to sail out with 40 ships bearing only the Carthaginian citizens. When their departure was reported by the Greek sentries, Dionysius made a show of pursuing them, but delayed just enough to allow them to escape. He then led the army to the Punic camp to deal with all who were not protected by the terms of the deal. Having been abandoned, many of the Greek and Sicilian allies melted into the hills. The remaining forces were surrounded. Apparently, the fierce Iberian mercenaries stood ready to fight to the death, but were merely hired by Dionysius using the money from their former commander. The remainder of the Punic army, which included substantial numbers of Libyans, was enslaved. Upon Himilco's return to Carthage, this shameful event caused an uproar. Not only was the army defeated abroad, threatening the strategic control of Sicily, but the abandonment of the allies and mercenaries now threatened the stability of the homeland itself. Indeed, the Libyans soon broke out into revolt. The rebels grew in such numbers that 70,000 of them were said to have besieged the city of Carthage. To make matters worse, a plague was also reported to have swept across Africa. The displeasure of the Carthaginian gods was apparent to all. Himilco, the man held responsible for this chain of disasters, is likely to have been castigated by the court of 104. Our records indicate that while he was not given the traditional punishment of execution by crucifixion, there would be no path for redemption. It was said that the shamed general accepted full responsibility for the disaster, and now took up the robes of a slave, left to shamble to all the temples of the city, begging for forgiveness. In a final act...
That's wild. That's the thing, though. Himilco seems, at times, to have gotten the best of Dionysius. Like, those two were playing chess. Like, in the beginning siege, he managed to trap the Carthaginian... I mean, not... he trapped the Syracusans, and then they managed to pull their ships through land, and then Uno reversed that. And then we have the naval battle, where he defeated the Syracusans, but then, like, immediately besieged them. But then Dionysius kept Uno reversing all of his accomplishments. They really did seem to be playing against each other. That's why I said they seemed more or less kind of on equal footing, but Dionysius proved to be the better one at the end. So again, he did his best, I feel. Like, I feel sad, you know? Himilco, I feel like, did his best and did really well, but at the end, just he couldn't overcome Dionysius. You know, it was checkmate for the most part. So that's sad. He actually did seem to have talent, but obviously faltered at the end, you know?
Himilco then bricked himself into his own home, refusing all aid until he starved to death. How the mighty of Carthage had fallen. Meanwhile, Dionysius in Sicily was at the height of his power. The tyrant now prepared to prosper at his enemy's expense.
So that's 2 for Syracuse, 1 for Carthage. Let's see if Carthage can rebound in the 4th war tomorrow. Bye everyone.